Welcome, everyone. You have missed us for a while. We've missed a month, but we are back with our Journey to LGBTQ Parenthood series. Um, Again, my name is Kenny Hutton. I use he, him pronouns, and I serve as the Deputy Director of the Center for Public Equity. I'm also the CEO, co-founder of the Capital Ballroom Council, principal of Kenny Hutton LLC, and a number of other things. But today I am your co-host, and I am joined today by the amazing, what's that? Okay, that side, there we go. The amazing David Marshall.
And Kenya, I don't have that kind of illustrious bio. I'm just the founder and CEO of Journey to Josiah, and that's all. Nothing else fancy. I have no additional entities to my name. Just that one.
But you
That's
know
all.
what? That's important and that's amazing, right? That the work that you do is amazing, and I love it. I love the work that you do. David, your podcast. Can we talk about that for a second? How's
We
it been
can,
going?
as I still
You
see
launched
myself
it.
freezing up. I did. It's going well. I'm loving these stories, and I've had some amazing guests, some sitting on this screen, and I let me say this: what it has been, I would say, almost life changing, which sounds probably over the top, but as an adoptive parent, listening to the stories of adoptees, birth parents, birth mother, birth father, I have both who I've interviewed, and when I'm listening at social workers who are foster care social workers who work in private adoption, when I have listened to all of these different guests, I am constantly in awe because there's not one, no two adoption stories are the same.
Yeah.
And I'm learning so much, even as how to approach this subject, even with Josiah, because that's the scary thing for me. I tell anybody, he's 6, he doesn't yet fully understand, and I'm kind of maybe cheating off of some folk a little bit to help me on this journey as I tell him his story, as it is appropriate for him. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's why some of these conversations are important, right? Because we all have to learn from each other. I think it's important for us also. There's no rule book, there's no guidebook, there's no manual to this stuff. We kind of learn it as we go along, and learn from each other. Um, so yeah, so today's topic. You want to talk about today's topic? We're talking about challenging anti-LGBT. No, that's not what we're talking about today. Today we're talking about funding. That's another one we're gonna do. Look at the wrong thing on my calendar. We're going to be talking about funding and financing for adoption and fostering. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came to this.
Sure. Well, so let me ask you this question before I go too far in. So you might not be used to this, but I'm a tell-all book. And so for our listening audience, Kenya and I are exchanging messages. As I know, I'm sitting here freezing. So I might have to do a quick goodbye and then come back with a quick hello. Shall I do that now, Kenya?
Sure, go for it. While you do that, I'm going to play the commercial I have for you for your podcast. How about that?
Ah, thanks. All
Not a
right, I'm gonna go
problem.
out and
Not a
come back.
problem. All right. That was not the right commercial. You know what, David? I don't think I have your commercial anymore, but it's okay. It's okay. Um, so what I'm going to do while David is coming back in, I am going to introduce our guest. Um, I don't know them very well, but prior to the show, we have been chatting and having a good laugh. So what I'm going to do, oh, and guess who's back? David.
Ah, looks like I'm not freezing now.
There
Okay,
you
very
go.
good.
There you
All
go.
right.
There you. I also realized I don't have your commercial anymore.
Oh, okay. Well,
So,
that's fine. Did you
uh,
sing to the people while I was
you
off
know,
trying to get unfrozen?
we want listeners, we want viewers, And if I start singing, they might
Okay.
ban me off of all social media platforms. So I won't do that.
All
You're the
right. Well,
singer
we
here.
won't.
You're the voice here.
Then we won't have that. We need you to be very active on these platforms. So
Yeah.
no. All right. Very good. Very good. So what am I
Well, I was
talking
about
about?
to
Am I
start.
talking about the
Yeah. Go ahead. We can talk
am I talking
about
about
the topic.
so we decided to have conversation around adoption ethics and funding. Why did we decide to do both of these? Well, as those of you who are possibly considering this adoption journey, we want to be able to give you as much information as possible to really guide you along that journey. Additionally, what is really, really good, and it's some new information for me as well, I'll say, because I'm not, I mean, I work in this field, but this is not my how would I say? I'm not all the way on the inside. I have some different ways that I work. But there is new legislation that is on the horizon as it pertains to adoption agencies and how they are being regulated. And so I thought it was important to really, really lean into that so that we have a full understanding of what we should be looking for on another level, we'll say.
Yeah.
And then of course, funding is it's frightening. If you go the private route, it isn't cheap. It's not
Mm,
cheap. I mean, we have to
mhm.
face facts. And so there are some other methods, and you don't have to necessarily go broke like I did. I tell everybody I had $249 left to my name, but I had my baby, but I was poor. I mean, not poor, I was poor. And if
Oh,
something happened at my house, I don't know what we'd have just been sitting there. I
oh
don't know.
God.
But that's all right. Sometimes it takes a few of us to kind of go through some of these processes in order to help some others to not have to go through some of the journeys and all of that stuff that we had to go through.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hopefully this is something that will be very, very useful to kind of help people. One again, because I think sometimes that whole price tag is what really, really scares people,
Yeah.
and we don't want folk to be afraid.
Not at all. I think one of the things with that I want to also highlight is that one of the reasons we're doing these series because we really want to be able to use this time to really dig deep, right, and have opportunity to really talk about some of these topics instead of like trying to put them all into like an hour or hour and a half. We think it's really important to have these questions answered and to give folks as much information as we can. So I do want to
Yeah.
highlight that. So you will see, these things popping up. David, you got a shout out. Someone here loves you. Deneen Griffith.
Oh, I must be live for the first time. Hey,
Yes,
Deneen Griffin.
you got it. Yep. I see it right there. I see it. I see it up on the screen. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So we're also streaming live on David's social media as well. But yeah,
We
we
finally
definitely want to
figured it
make sure
out.
we created opportunities where folks will be able to ask questions and really have time to really dig deep into some of these topics. We've talked about fostering, we've talked about adoption. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about financing and a little bit about some of the legislation that is bubbling up, right?
Yeah.
I know we have another episode coming up soon that we're going to really spend quite some time talking about it, but we wanted to take this opportunity to really talk about some of the financing and how people can navigate some of these things. So I will ramble, David. You know this, so let's
Okay.
start introducing our guests tonight.
Absolutely. So I'm excited to have two amazing women in the world of adoption. And our first guest, the first one I'm going to introduce is going to be Miss Shanitra Groves. She is the Chief Administrative Officer at Gift of Adoption Funds. So Shanitra's going to be talking about that funding stuff. She's going to help y'all to not be po when y'all leave these adoption agencies. And then we have Miss Pam Holer, who is a director of placement services at Paths for Families. Paths for Families holds a very, very special place in my heart because it's the agency that I adopted Josiah
Mm.
through. And so they're my be all and end all. I go to them for everything. I've often said many times they need to be national. I can't stand the fact that they just in the DMV. But that's another conversation for another time. I'm not going to keep running that into the ground.
All right, well, let's welcome Shanitra and Pam. Welcome.
Hello.
We got to get some sound effects, some applause for when especially seeing guests
Oh
like you all are
yes.
joining us. Um, Look out for the next one. I'll have it. Welcome, welcome, welcome
Yes.
to the show.
Well, thank you for the invite, Kenya and David. I am excited to be here to talk about Gift of Adoption Fund and how we can help your listeners have that financial barrier removed when trying to adopt or expand their family. So I'm so excited, and thank you for the invite.
Awesome. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes. Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here as well. I can speak to the process and how to remain sane and ethical as you're going through the journey. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks.
Yes, thank
Sane and
you.
ethical is a really good thing.
Very
We
good
definitely
thing.
want to do that. And and part of that would also be, this is why the two of you are together, because sane and ethical also goes along with making sure that we are not, as I said earlier, not poor, but when we
Mhm,
finish our process, right?
mhm,
Um,
absolutely.
so all of these things, they work together very, very well.
So just a
So
reminder,
let's
folks, I just want to say, just reminding folks that they can ask their questions live. You don't have to wait for a delay. Pop your questions in the comment section, whatever platform you are on, and we will get your questions answered. David, take it away.
All right. So, as I said to our guests, we're diving into this whole idea of one, how to identify, and we've talked about this a little bit in the panel, but in a different regard. When talking about identifying right adoption agencies before, we talked about those agencies that are going to be inclusive agencies. As many of our guests, well, some of our guests probably don't know that it can be a struggle for those in the LGBTQ community to navigate this world of adoption and fostering. So we've gone down that road, but we've not gone down the road of ethics and what we really, really need to be looking at on another level in terms of adoption. Of course, and Shanitra is going to also take us into that world of how we're going to fund it. And so I want to, as a opener for both of you, I want you to kind of, and we'll start with Pam, talk a bit about your role at Paths for Families, who they are, what they are. Y'all know I love you so much, but I'm going to fall back. Pam.
Well, some of you may not know, we were an agency known as Adoptions Together for many years, and we want to hold on to that brand equity. So we are now all the placement programs. So all of the programs that we have that are related to just that process of home study, training, placement, post-placement finalization are all still called Adoptions Together, a program of Paths for Families. So I just want to make sure that folks realize that we are still here as Adoptions Together. But my agency helps families in the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, navigate the process. We go through the home study. We have an infant placement program. So those are folks who are wanting to adopt an infant. We help counsel expectant parents. We help prospective adoptive parents as they wait. And then we help with placement. We also have a foster care adoption program where we help families in our area adopt children who are legally free, meaning their parental rights have been terminated and they are in need of a permanent resource for an adoptive family. So there are all sorts of ways to adopt through our agency, just to give you some context. But, it was really interesting when you said that, David, about, identifying an agency, identifying a space for the LGBTQ people that's both ethical and what Shanitra is going to talk about later, financially sound. And I would really, really encourage folks to look into a couple of the different accrediting bodies that can help folks, look for the right agency. We've got the Human Rights Campaign, All Children, All Families Initiative that supports their accreditation process that looks at agencies, foster care and adoption agencies throughout the country to ensure that they are inclusive, that their policies are inclusive, that their documents, language, values, everything are inclusive and accepting of the LGBTQ population. So that's a great place to start first. And I'm not sure you knew that one.
No, absolutely. That is a great one. And can you, can you tell our listeners a little bit? Now, I know you're not here working for the Human Rights Campaign, but can you tell them a little bit of how they can possibly navigate? What would they be looking for there?
Sure. So the Human Rights Campaign is a large lobbying organization for the LGBTQ community nationally. And if you were to go to their site, it's like hrc.org. They have the All Families, All Children initiative. You click into that tab and they have a tool there that says, find a reputable agency. And you can go to the state and kind of narrow down to see where you are and who the agencies are in your state that are accredited by the HRC. And there's varying levels of accreditation as well. My agency happens to hold the highest level of accreditation. We are the innovator status, which basically means we've been turned inside out, upside down to ensure that all of our practices are sound for the LGBTQ population. But there are other levels of accreditation as well that just show that you're working with allies.
That's awesome. Absolutely. I didn't know that was on the HRC's website.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Yeah. I didn't know that was on HRC's website.
Yeah.
Interesting. Good to know.
And it's true. It is. You do have to go inside out to be accredited. So little joke there from me. I've attempted to go through this as well. And I was like, wait a minute here. I'm a whole member of the LGBT. Why I got to go through all of this? What I got to do? I am he. I am he. But again, I digress. But it's an amazing organization, and they have a variety of resources, not even just housed within the world of adoption and fostering. So it's just something that our community should really be familiar with. And Shanitra, tell us a bit about Gift of Adoption. So let me just say one little aside. I became familiar, I think, maybe a year or so ago. We began to email one another, and I was like, wait a minute. This is what people can actually get a grant. I've never asked this question. Maybe I should ask it in front of everybody. Can I submit my documents now and get a retroactive grant?
But thank you for asking.
No, don't work that way. Okay.
You have to be in the process, David. In the process, and we are happy to help you jump over that hurdle. But if we
the word says you have not because you ask not, so I figured I'd ask.
You can ask whatever you like, my dear, whatever you like. But unfortunately, it has to be a no on that one. So we're going to help some of those in the pipeline who need that help right now at this minute.
Absolutely. So tell us a bit more. Tell us a bit about the organization.
Absolutely. Well, I am with Gift of Adoption Fund. I have been with the organization for 16 years. We are one of the largest grant providers who provide grants and award them without regard to race, religion, marital status, sexual orientation. So we love to brag about that. We don't care about religion. We do not care. We really want to help you expand or start your family. So you definitely want to start with Gift of Adoption Fund. Our grants range in amounts from $500 all the way to $15,000. We have a focus on helping domestic adoptions as well as international. We have what we consider our greatest funding opportunities, which are, of course, are to prevent children from going into foster care. We want to keep siblings together. And with international adoptions, our main focus is trying to keep children from aging out of the orphanage, as well as very fragile medical conditions. And so those are funding priorities for us. And of course, keeping kinship adoptions as well. So that's really important too. So those are kind of our main focal points. We have 29 chapters throughout the US. And so our chapters, which I want to shout out every chapter and chapter president, they work very, very hard to fundraise. We have given away $17.4 million since inception, and we have helped over 5,500 children find their forever family. So I am absolutely thrilled at the direction that we're going in and the number of families we have been able to help. And it is important that everyone realizes we are here. Lots of families do not know that we're here. You are free to apply with Gift of Adoption once you have completed your home study. And so it's okay if you have not been matched yet. It's A-okay. We want to get that application in, as we realize with domestic adoptions or international, they can take a turn very quickly. So we'd love to have that application in to us for consideration. The process takes roughly 60 days for review, start to finish. You'll want to visit our website at giftofadoption.org. You'll click on apply for a grant. Everything we do is electronic, so it's all online. Very simple, very easy application. Enter in the information we ask. You will upload your federal income tax return, proof of income for both applicants. You will also upload a copy of your home study. We do realize that some home study agencies will not release that to you. That's okay. You can just upload a note in that section that says will be sent by agency directly. They can email that to me for processing, not a problem. If you are self-employed, as some of our applicants can be, we will ask for the most recent bank statements, 2 months of bank statements as proof of your income, along with 2 letters of reference. So you'll upload all of those items to the website. You will pay the $50 processing fee, submit it, and you will receive a copy for your records. And so after that has been received, you may get an email from myself if we're missing anything. And then, of course, maybe 30 days, 15 to 30 days thereafter, you'll receive an email asking you to update adoption information. You'll go through the review process. If awarded a grant, it can range from $500 to $15,000. That grant will be dispersed if it's a domestic adoption, upon placement, if it's an international adoption. Once you have your final travel dates in place, those funds will be dispersed to your adoption agency or attorney. If your balance is 0 at the time, do not worry or panic. You will receive a refund of that overpayment from your agency or attorney. So that's kind of how the process works a little bit in a nutshell, kind of the Cliff Notes version.
That's amazing. I did not realize that there was the breakdown in terms of the kind of adoption, one be it domestic and international, and then the focus being, or one of the priorities, I'll say, on keeping sibling groups together. And what was the other community, the other area that you all are very, very passionate about funding?
So we want to prevent foster care. So we want to keep any of the children from going into foster care. And obviously, if there is a child in foster care, we want to get them out of foster care. We want to keep sibling groups together. So important. And we also start to see a trend of kinship adoptions. And so that's so important, whether that's grandparents adopting their grandchildren. And sometimes they just assume, I get so many phone calls, well, would you help a grandparent adopt or a step parent adopt? Absolutely. It's yes. The answer is yes to everything. We want to help. So those are our greatest funding priorities are those, but it's just not limited to, if you're doing just a standard adoption, it's okay if the child is not a sibling. You know, it's okay if they're not in foster care. It's okay. We definitely want you to apply. It's just a funding priority. That's all. So we like to, and that's what we would consider kind of like a tier 1. We want to make that happen immediately. And from the international side, we have children who in some countries, they turn 13 and 14, they age out. If you can imagine that you put a child that age on the street, that makes no sense to me. And it just breaks our heart. So that is huge for us. We want to stop children who are in the orphanage from aging out. So we are prayerful that they are adopted as soon as possible. So that's a big immediate funding for us. And then there are so many children who are medically fragile. And we want to make sure that we help that adoption, get their child here to the U.S. for the medical care that he or she needs. So those are our greatest funding priorities outside of every other request that we receive.
Absolutely. And so probably one of the biggest questions that one would ask is, when you're submitting a lot of financial information, is there a well, do you have to be in a certain socioeconomic level to qualify for funding?
Absolutely not. So I'm going to say maybe 10 years ago or so, we have done away with the income kind of limitations or bracket that you should be at to apply. And so the thought process behind that was, it could be a family who may look very good on paper. So let's say, for example, but this adoption, it was a stork drop. The family has no time to save money to make the adoption happen. So let's say if a family had an additional 6 months, they probably would not need gift of adoptions assistance. So for us, it's a matter of you want to do the adoption. The grant selection committee will take into consideration the application in totality. So we're going to look at income, we're going to look at perseverance, we're going to look at the expenses that you have. All of that is taken into consideration, but it's not drop dead spot on with, well, I'm making 150,000, so it absolutely excludes you. That is not true. That is not true. So the income is a small factor of it, but it's the whole picture in totality. So your savings, if you're crowdfunding, lots of things come into play. But we did absolutely do away with that years ago.
So with that, then, now you said it ranges from $500 to $15,000. Does one's personal finances then play a role in the amount then that would be awarded?
Absolutely not. So what plays a role in that is the gap that you have. So let's say, for example, there's a family that applies, and let's say that there's a foster care adoption, and we know sometimes there's a state and federal subsidies. So let's say that the family just needs help with that home study. And let's say the home study is $3,000, families pay $1,500. Gift of adoption will come in and close that gap, and we'll award $1,500. Family needs that to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And then let's say if there's a family completing an international adoption, and it is $50,000. Family has $40,000. They may need the 10, and we're looking at, there's no other resource, there's no crowdfunding, there's nothing else. They're adopting 3 children. We'll come in and close that gap. So it really will depend on what the family's financial needs are, what they have available to add to it. Lots of families are doing crowdfunding. Gift of adoption is starting to do crowdfunding as well with families. So we've set up a platform to kind of help the families with that. So you can crowdfund up to a certain amount of that adoption while also being considered for a traditional grant. So we've had families successfully crowdfund a lot of money, as well as getting that traditional grant, and really closes the gap. And they're so excited to have that opportunity to do so. So that's something we've been doing the past 3 years with crowdfunding. And so we're getting pretty good at that. And we're receiving positive responses from that. So we're happy to try to help kind of the families, all the way around if possible. And of course, it's always based on funding for us. The chapters fund the grants in their states, which is really cool. So a lot of our chapters are just rock stars when it comes to throwing these events. And I'm happy to say, I don't know how many organizations can, but I love to brag about every dollar raised from any chapter goes 100% to help the families. We are grateful for our national board and our investor board as they take care of the administrative overhead. Our chapters do not. When they fundraise for their state, for their families. 100% of that goes to those families in those chapter states. So we're thrilled about that.
That's awesome.
If there's a family that's not in a chapter state, what would they do?
You still apply through national. So there's one place to apply, which is national. And so what happens is we'll review it. We have a grant selection committee that's comprised of a member from every single chapter. And so they sit together. And so if you're assigned to, if there's a nearby chapter, that family is connected there. If it happens to be a family that there's no chapter within a certain radius, national picks it up. So no child is literally left behind. And that's a secret no one knows. So when we have our fundraising gala, we have a pot that we will literally take care of that family and fund that grant. So national funds grants, and no one knows that, but we never say. So that's how we do it. The chapters work together. We have some chapters who are overfunded. They have so much money that they give to other chapters that are underfunded to continue to help. So everyone works together. It's very cohesive. And it's a well-oiled machine. So I love it. So literally we're able to award so many grants because of that model. Shockingly, and I want to say we probably receive maybe 100 to 150 grants a month that the committee will go through. And then on average, we're able to award between 60 and 75. So we're doing really, really well with that.
That was actually one of the questions I wrote down. So you answered it right there.
So yes, so we're very proud of that. So trying to increase our average grant award amount, which is about $4,400, we're working hard to increase that as well. So we have I want to say currently 797 families in our pipeline, and our goal is to help about 950 this year. So we're really excited, really excited. So trying to spread the word, trying to tell people we're here, we have money. I'm just going to bring a sign. We're here, we have money, we want to help. Call me. We have money. Call me, please.
We're here, we have money, we want to help.
I don't want you to be putting that sign, because now I'm ready to call again. I'm trying to figure out, can it be a retroactive fund sent back here with the "we here, we have money"? Call you.
Call me. We have money. We have so many. It's sad to say, but we do have some states where we have restricted funding. That I've been beating the pavement with outreach, telling people literally, send me families, we have money. So Dayton, Ohio is one that we're trying to, drum up more applicants for. Beloit in Wisconsin, that's another one we're trying to drum up applications for. So I'm doing outreach, reaching out to attorneys, reaching out to agencies, social workers. I am screaming from the rooftops. We have money. We are here. Please send me applicants. So for those who are listening, tell a friend, tell someone, we have money and we're trying to give it away.
That's amazing. And, and not to become, sorry, Kenya, go ahead.
No, I was saying that's an amazing place to be as an organization. To, many organizations, especially in my line of work, we're struggling for money to be able to be an organization and say, listen, we have money. We want the families to give it. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Well, yeah, I need more families that have the opposite.
Wow. Well, hey, not to become political, but I don't know. It must not be as bad as some of the people think if they're able to then donate these amounts of money, right? So, but I'll leave that right there. I'm going to segue over to Pam for a little bit. So, and kind of keeping it in this conversation a bit more, and then we're going to go into some of the other legislative things. One of the things that you and I talked about when I was talking to you offline was people are always upset and wanting to know why they have to pay. So can you tell us a little bit about why there's a cost associated and kind of what these fees kind of can go to? And let me say this before you answer it. I don't know how far our audience is in terms of their listening, meaning where they're all listening from. Things do look a little different agency to agency, but we talked a little bit about maybe some standard practice. So Pam, if you can speak to that a bit.
Sure. Yeah. So, when you're talking about ethical adoption, there's going to be a price tag. And I think, the amount of the price tag is where the ethics sort of get a little bit gray, because there are some adoption providers who do charge a lot of money for not a lot of service. You've got the adoption brokers who are out there that are really just charging for advertising, matching. They're not doing any of the legal work. They're not doing any of the counseling. That's some of what the legislation is that we'll talk about a little bit later. But there are a lot of folks out there who are unlicensed and unregulated, and they're posing as agencies, taking an exorbitant amount of money, and really all they're doing is matchmaking. And so it's, the world of adoption it can be tricky. And that's why these panels are so important, so that folks can learn about how to navigate this. So when we're talking about funding, you want an agency that provides not just a blanket service of, hey, you're going to adopt through us, because that means generally that they're a matchmaker. Okay. They're not an agency. And you want an agency that's going to provide all options counseling to their expectant parents. What all options counseling means is that we have counselors who work with our expectant parents before they make the plan of adoption to say, is adoption for you? Is parenting for you? Is kinship care for you? Is termination for you? What is the right choice for you and your child? And it might not be adoption. Okay. So a lot of times people say, what am I paying for? Well, you're paying for that. You're paying for those counselors to do the work to ensure that adoption really is the best decision for this individual and her child. And then you're also paying for matching and home study and the services that professionals, experienced professionals, are providing to you. You want the legal work to be done, and you want it to be done correctly. Right. You want the counseling to be done, and you want it to be done correctly. And so, when you're looking at an agency or an attorney or whomever, whatever path you're taking, look to see what their fees are, and look to see that you can get a fee sheet that sort of spells out all the things that you're getting. If you're not getting a fee sheet and they're not spelling out to you what you're getting, that's a red flag.
Okay. That's a red flag. Tip. I was going to ask, how do we know, like someone like myself who's entering this arena, how do we know some red flags about, who's an adoption broker and who's not? And you kind of answered that with the fee sheet, because as I've had some conversations with some folks, some have given me a fee sheet and been very transparent about what the money goes to. Some have not. And I've had those, and I was just like, why can't you tell me what I'm paying for? You want me to give you $150,000 that you can't tell me exactly how that's being broken down?
Right.
Agreed. Yeah. And I was just like, that doesn't make any sense. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, sure. And again, I think, the cost of adoption, it does vary greatly. Some situations, is from foster care, the fees are less expensive than a private adoption, simply because they're subsidized by each of the different states and counties. Then there's also using an attorney. Maybe you already have a match because your sister's cousin's neighbor's brother has somehow gotten a situation in which they want to make a plan of adoption, and all you need is an attorney, so that the fees are more minimal there. Mm-hmm. But I've also seen some of these agencies charge just such exorbitant fees, and they don't tell you what it's for, right? Mm-hmm. So the average cost of adoption in the United States can go anywhere from, say, $10,000 to $40,000. And those are like the more, that's what I'm talking more about, ethical adoption. If you're going beyond $40,000, you really want to start asking some questions about.
You just blew my mind right there when you said to 40,000, because like I said, I spoke to someone they was charging over $100,000.
Yeah, that's.
And you just said it should go 10 to 40. And I'm sitting here like, wait a minute. I was getting ripped off.
Wait, you spoke to an agency, and that was the.
I spoke to a number of people. I have emails, and they quoted me numbers way more. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was just like, wait a minute.
No, that's
$40,000.
That's okay. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm only looking at my 3 jurisdictions, Maryland, DC, and Virginia, but I also am a part of various different consortiums, and we share information. We also do interstate adoption. So some of our families that are living in Maryland, DC, and Virginia are working with agencies in Indiana and Utah, California, what have you. So we see different agencies, and we've seen some of these price tags, and it's just, it's a lot. Also, something to consider with finances is every state is different in terms of what kind of expenses you can help an expectant parent with prior to the birth of the child and then after. I've recently learned that my 3 jurisdictions, my 2 jurisdictions, I should say, DC, you don't need it, but in our 2 in Maryland and DC, you need a doctor's note in order to provide living expenses for an adoptive or an expected parent. Many states, you don't need that doctor's note in order to provide living expenses. They may need to be approved by a judge, but it can be anywhere from a couple $100 a month to almost $10,000 a month for some of these expectant parents. So that's something else that families need to look into when they're looking for an agency, asking about how do you fund birth parent expenses, expectant parent expenses. And I say expectant parents because a lot of times you're providing expenses for someone who's considering adoption, but in every state, they don't none of their consents are really binding until the child is born.
Mm-hmm.
So they can change their mind, which is their right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. So let's segue a little bit more into the ethical area. So we have accredited agencies and we have licensed agencies. What are the differences? What are the differences between the two? Are there differences between the two?
Not really. And agencies that are accredited, say like we're accredited by the HRC, that's just an added layer of you know, credibility, accredited credibility, but it's just an added layer of, saying that we want to do the right thing. What you want is a licensed entity, whether it's an attorney or whether it's an agency. You want a licensed entity. Child placing agencies are licensed in every state by the Department of Social Services, Department of Human Resources, whoever it is in that state. But it says we've done the work to ensure that we have the policies and procedures, that we're following the rules, and we have oversight. We have the state, regulating board coming and looking at our files, coming and looking at, the work that we've done to ensure that we are, dotting our I's and crossing our T's. So really, there's no difference between, there is a difference between accredited and licensed. Accredited, you don't have to be. Licensed, you should.
You should be. And it's good to know. I didn't know this part. So with the licensed agencies, then you do have oversight, because in my own mind too, thinking private, I was thinking that really they're overseeing themselves. And so there's a state board, I would say.
Yeah, and you can also use an attorney who is a reputable attorney. So it doesn't have to just be through an agency. You can have a private adoption, but you want to ensure that the attorney is, board certified in that state to do the work as well. So I don't want to leave out the attorneys. It's not just agencies, but attorneys. And when you're talking about accreditation with adoption attorneys, we really recommend using attorneys who are Quad A accredited, which means that they are a member of I believe it's the Academy of Artificial Reproduction and Adoption Attorneys.
Can I ask a question? So how do we check that information, right? Where do we go to find out whether an organization is accredited or they're part of Quad A? Because I'm asking for myself.
Yeah, no. I was just on the Quad A website today. There's another great little tool on the Quad A website. It says, search attorney by state. You can go to your state and you can see all the attorneys in your state that are members of the Quad A group. Similarly, I would encourage you to go to a site called Ethical Family Building, and they have a tool on there called the Adopt Change tool, where you can find out if an agency is an accredited agency or a licensed agency and not just an unlicensed, unregulated entity. One of the legislations that we are proposing this year, HR Bill 5540, the In Good Standing bill, is hopefully a national list that would be published by the federal government every year that would list out all of the agencies that are in good standing. So there would be one spot that is supported by the federal government. It's not there yet, but we're planning on it. The one that I mentioned that's through Ethical Family Building is really just a tool that they created. It's not supported by the federal government. It's not law, but you can, they have done the work to get folks on there. So there's a couple different ways that you can search out, agencies and attorneys to use.
And of course, HRC, where we can find accreditation by, like for gifts of adoption is there as well, right?
Yep.
Could you say that?
And I wanted to add in there
one more time. I'm sorry, I keep on jumping. Could you just say that one more time? It's Quad QUADA. How do you spell
it's just AAAA. Quad A. Yeah.
I would have been Googling the wrong thing and found myself somewhere.
Yeah. If you type in, I think the way that I usually get to it is Quad A attorneys. But it's the American Academy. No, sorry. It's not the American Academy. It's the Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproduction Attorneys.
Gotcha.
So it's adoptionart.org.
Adoptionart.org. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure, not for myself, but also for the listeners that are listening tonight and in the future. Thank you for that.
And I want to tag into that too. The other thing that listeners should consider, even with a Quad A attorney, is looking at their bios to make sure that they too are working with all families. Not all attorneys are doing that either. And so in their bios, they do specify, and it's not to say that those who don't have that there, they don't. But unfortunately, I tell anybody, if I got to go looking, I'm probably not going to be bothered with it. It should be right there for us to know, right? So another thing to look at, not just with the agencies, but with the Quad A attorneys as well. So Pam, the bill that you just made reference to, this is the new bit of legislation that is on the table, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. There are several right now that are on the table. One was HR Bill 5540, the In Good Standing Act, which I talked about. But a bigger one that I really want to support is the HR Bill 6220, the Adopt Act. And this is a bipartisan bill that calls for oversight, protection, and transparency in adoption. And it would eliminate the use of online for-profit brokers. And would really just kind of hold the standards of having a licensed, regulated entity performing adoption services in the state in which they are licensed.
When you say online for-profit brokers, can you we don't want to be calling any names, get ourselves in a whole bunch of trouble, but so there are so many, and you and I have talked about this too in our many conversations. There are so many of these online quote unquote adoption entities, we'll say. So when you talk about so is there a difference then between some of these entities that are specifically brokers and some that are actually legitimate agencies, if you will, or placing?
Well, you want to make sure that you're working with someone to do the matching that is licensed in that state, because every state has different laws about adoption. Adoption is not nationally regulated at this point. It is regulated state by state. And so my agency works in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. We are experts on the law in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. So if I get an expectant parent who calls me from Ohio, I'm not going to be the best person to talk with them about making an adoption plan in Ohio. So what's happening with a lot of these unlicensed and unregulated brokers is they're off in another state somewhere. I won't even mention states. And they're working with an expectant parent from Ohio. They match them with an adoptive family from Maryland. They're out in, let's say, Alaska, just because it's the furthest state away. They don't know anything about the laws of Ohio or Maryland, right? And they match them without doing any options counseling, without doing any adoption education. They match them and kind of send them off into the wild. And when I say the wild, they usually try to connect them with an attorney, not always a Quad A attorney. So it's not always someone that knows about the laws of both states. They might know the laws of Ohio. They don't know the laws of Maryland. And there's just not a lot of, I don't know the word I'm thinking of, but, there's a lot more information a lot more education that needs to go on than just the match. Right. And so what's happening is people are getting matched with expectant parents who aren't ready to make an adoption plan. They may be getting matched with individuals who never even thought of making an adoption plan, but are kind of, this is just something that they do. But then also they don't know the laws. I had a situation recently in which we got involved and we found out that an expectant parent was being paid living expenses, but they wanted to go by Maryland law. they can't go by Maryland law and get paid living expenses without a doctor's note. But this matchmaker didn't know that. So they were facilitating this process that could have been considered unlawful.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. As we're talking about legislation in different states and different jurisdictions, I want to ask Shanitra, if you have experience, since you all work nationally, right? Have you experienced some states that had legislation that made it difficult for you all to provide resources and support to families for adoption?
Thankfully, we have not run into that. In my 16 years of doing this, we have not. We rely on kind of people like Pam and others in that space who vet the families, they do the home study. You know, we make sure for us, even on our site, we provide you with some resources for COA accredited agencies if you're doing international adoption. So we too are on that ethical bandwagon. We want to make sure that families who are doing these international adoptions are doing it the correct way. It's not a black market adoption. So we also have that at the forefront, and we'll put resources on our webpage so that families who are researching can click on certain links that will take you to Quad A attorneys, will take you to the Hague accreditation. It'll tell you what Hague accreditation is, give you all the resources, tell you certain countries that'll be listed with a travel advisory that says you can't travel right now to complete an adoption, and it gives you that information. So it's really helpful for all. But we have not, based on our role in the adoption process, we wouldn't see a roadblock like that. By the time the family makes it to us, every hurdle has been jumped except the financial hurdle. So they've made it through the home study process, right? They've been given the green light. They've been matched with a child. If not, they're waiting to be matched. They have an agency who is COA accredited working with the family, or they're with an adoption attorney that's licensed or is Quad A. So for us, those expectations have been met. And for me, I'm just waiting after the grant's been awarded to help disperse that. So the only roadblock that I may see is not from an ethical perspective, but it may come from a contested adoption out of the blue. You know, family's been awarded, placement has happened. Pam, I'm sure you're aware that this happens. And all of a sudden, maybe a dad may contest it, someone may contest it, and that will hold a family up for months. And I've even seen a few years. On the international side of it, the only roadblock we may catch is when family comes home, it may be an issue with a green card being issued for a child. We've had a family wait 2.5 years to get a green card for their child and just recently received it in the mail. And I almost fell off my seat when I opened that email. And I was so happy because we had been waiting so long for this young lady to get her green card. So those are the only roadblocks we see per se. But I think all of our partners that do all of this wonderful vetting for us, once the families make it, our job is to process the application, remove the financial barrier, and move forward. So we don't have to do a lot of thinking when it comes to this. We're grateful for Pam and those in her space.
Well, and I wanted to say, I think, you know, Shanitra and I just worked a situation that, you know, I think, you know, ethics really did come into play. This was a situation where we knew that this family was going to need funding, and the family requested the funding, and Shanitra and her organization would not approve the funding until the parental rights were thoroughly terminated. In our jurisdiction, that means 30 days. And so we had to wait an additional 30 days to ensure that they would fund this family's adoption. But I think what that made me realize is that like parties deal with like parties. And I think a lot of times, you know, we, as Shanitra said, we kind of rely on each other to help hold us all accountable. Mm-hmm. And, you know, if we wanted to push forward with this in a way that gift of adoption wasn't comfortable, they would have pulled out.
Correct.
Right. And similarly, they would have pulled out from our situation if they saw that we weren't doing something in a reputable way, an ethical way. So I think, you know, when you're asked, well, how do I find this? What are my red flags? Nothing I can tell your families to do more than research. Look at, let's say you're referred to Paths for Families. Look at their accreditation page. look at their partnerships page, see who they're with. Gift of adoption, same thing. Look at their page, see who they're with, see who they do work with, because like parties tend to gravitate to like parties.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is so true. And it is important with our partnerships together. Pam, myself, and others in our organization, we had a serious email thread that went on for weeks. And you know how you feel so bad because I'm being a stickler and I'm like, well, Pam, I've got to have this. And once this happened, let me know. And everything has to be in writing for a gift of adoption. And so we went back and forth, and I didn't delete that until everything was done. And then I made copies of all of that and put it in the file. But it is important to us that we do realize with our partnerships, everything is transparent and above board. That's how gift of adoption functions. No other way would we do it. And so we appreciate our partners who feel the same way and have no issue with providing us with the documentation that we require. And I think sometimes our wonderful grant families, they are stressed out enough going through the adoption process where I feel it's my job to step in and kind of do some of this back and forth like Pam and I may do on their behalf, because it's stressful for families. And so I don't ever want them to feel like, well, we did everything, you gave us the grant, but now we have to do this. Well, if the family shares with me, well, the adoption is being contested. So typically I was on path A. I have to switch now to path B, which is, well, have your social worker let me know what's going on. When's the court date going to happen? Let me know once the judge approves you to move forward. Then we'll get back onto path A. And you feel so awful, kind of snatching the rug from underneath someone, but we have to make sure it's going to happen. And the most important thing from a gift of adoption perspective is just that fiduciary responsibility we have to our donors, right? So we agree for the wonderful donors who have been backing us for 20 something years that this is exactly how we pay it. We have everything. This child is home. We send you the story. We give you the update. So I can't comfortably say, well, here's the $5,000 check. The adoption was contested. I knew all of this and didn't do my due diligence. So as soon as I see something or something doesn't feel right, I'll ask for some additional, information. I'll reach out to the agency. We'll have a conversation about what's going on, because the goal is to work together to get the child home with the family, not to make life difficult. But there are times when we may have to pull back just a bit. And I always tell the family, I'm still holding your hand through this process, but I've got to pull back a bit until you jump over this hurdle, and then we're back in it together. And so that's kind of how gift of adoption, we function with the grants program. And I've been so grateful to be able to oversee this grants program since I've been with the organization. We've seen it evolve, and I try to figure out what's most helpful to grant families. What do they need more of? What do they need less of from us? And so we do really good with our feedback. After an evaluation, after receiving the grant, you'll receive an evaluation. We'll keep up with families 6 months after awarded. We'll check in with them 18 months after, 3 years after, 7 years, and 10. So I've seen some children grow up through my career here that are in college, and they come back and speak at events. And so for us, it's important that we keep up with our families and we're still able to support them. So if there are other resources that you need that we can't provide, I'll give you some of our other outreach partners to say, hey, why don't you reach out to them? I'm sure they can help you. But it is important that we're transparent with each other, and that once I'm able to give a report back to our donors that we've spent, $50,000 in the Dayton, Ohio area, and we were able to bring, 10 children home. Here's the picture. Here's the story. This child is home. I'm not looking at the donor or giving a report saying, well, I've given away 50,000. None of the kids came home, and I can't tell you what happened. So that's important.
And I'm sorry if I'm jumping in too much, David, because I'm again, I am
please
researching the process. Oh, I have so many questions. And another reason why I love doing these shows is because if I have questions, there's someone else out there has these
Absolutely.
questions. And some of these other shows that we've had, and we talked about this, and you actually touched on it, is when things change and shift. So and I could go down the list of things that can happen, but we'll be here for like 3 days. Does either of your agencies, excuse me, connect folks with support services for that? Because it can be heart-wrenching to be on a path and then all of a sudden, something changes, right? We've had folks talk about that. what options are out there that your organizations, both your organizations, are able to not necessarily provide but connect folks to? Or is it even something that you all even engage in?
I'll take it first, Pam, if you don't mind. So for us, we don't have a buddy system set up with that regard. I think when families call us, or me specifically, when devastation has occurred, I'll get two types of calls. Devastation has occurred, match didn't happen as it should have, or, oh my gosh, we're home with our baby. Thanks again for partnering with us. But when it's the call of birth mom decided to parent, that's a tough call to receive. I've received so many, and that's a number that I hate to see that keeps increasing, but there's nothing we can do about it. I end up crying on the phone too, because I've become so close to my grant families. As I always say, these are my grant families. And then I think, what can I do to help support you? So I put myself into that supportive role of whatever you need, checking in on them, making sure they're okay. And if there is a resource that family needs, and sometimes they'll tell me specifically, I will make sure that I connect them with one of my outreach partners to say, this isn't something that we do specifically, but this social services agency can help. And so I'll refer out if it's needed. It's a tough process. It becomes a grieving process for families. And it's heart-wrenching to see families go through it. And with gift of adoption being so transparent, we do mention in the grant award letter that this grant is specific to this child. The adoption is, has been approved for. But if it does not go through, let me know immediately and I'll tell you what the next steps are. And usually what we'll do is we'll get updated information from the family once they're rematched. And usually it happens fairly quickly. Okay. We'll update all the information, take it back through the committee. They'll usually just reapprove it. Okay. And leave the grant in place. If additional funding is needed, that amount will be tweaked and increased if family needs that funding. But I do tell families, because it's hard to say, well, I'm sorry, this has happened. We'll put you back in for another decision. But I'll just kind of say, this is par for the course. Not to worry. I'm here for you. But just know we'll work together and we'll get you back where you are. Because I understand you were dependent upon these funds. And we do make sure families are absolutely reconnected to those funds. The reason why we say that, and we have them give us updated info, because if you were awarded $3,000, you may need $5,000 now. Yeah. So instead of you going, oh my gosh, now what do? I can't ask gift of adoption again. It's the same adoption. That's why we'll put those funds back in, have you give us updated financials. And if everything is still the same and the need is still the same, we'll keep it the same. If you need more, we'll increase it.
Awesome.
And so that's the purpose of that. But we do hold our families' hands through that process, and so that they don't feel alone, and try to ease the burden for what they're going through. It's just tough. Those are tough calls to take. I love the calls that we're home and I get the pictures of the children, but it's tough when the placement doesn't happen. It's tough.
I think it's also important. Yeah. So in my agency, we have a social worker who works primarily with the expectant parents, and we have a separate social worker who works primarily with the adoptive parents. And so each person in the party has their own representation. So, if we're working with an expectant parent and she chooses to, and they've been matched, and she chooses to parent, I don't have one social worker who has to feel split between, this one party that's happy that they're going this route and one party that's very sad that they're going this route. And even in, when an adoption does occur, there's a lot of grief for the birth parent. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm able to have my birth parent social worker work with the birth parent, and my adoptive parent social worker work with the adoptive family. So, very separate. We keep it separate so that they have that support and representation, as they go through the whole process. We've had situations as well when families needed a little bit more if there was a disruption, and the baby went to live with the birth family. We do have adoption specific counseling in our longer term counseling in our program, so that in our agency that we would refer families to. But yeah, you would really want to make sure that you are providing support to each member of the party, in the way that they need it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important. I think that's, that's just something I always think about is the support, right? Beyond the finance and helping me navigate, what happens mentally and emotionally through the process. Like you said, Pam, for both parties, I think it's always something important to consider. Because I couldn't imagine what I would go through if that happened to me. So yeah, thanks for sharing.
Sure.
And then also there are additional supports beyond that Pass for Family has for families like myself who are almost, I can't believe it, next month, 7 years into this, and we might be falling down on our faces thinking now I'm going to say this because this is what was said to me. This is a quote. This is not David, but my post-placement social worker said, there's going to be that day that you're going to look at your beautiful child and say, now just what in the hell did I get myself into? and when this was said to me, let me tell you this, Josiah was just he was about 2 weeks old when I got him. So he wasn't that old. And I'm like, oh no. Oh, that can't. Well, I've asked myself that question a few times now, and that's all right. I still love my baby with everything in me, but I have asked the question. But I would venture to say that some people who push their babies, I'll ask that same question too. So I'm just going to say that. All of that said, Pam, how do you help those of us who've now asked ourselves, what the hell do we get ourselves into 7 years later?
Yeah, 7 years later, 17 years later, 27 years later, we have post-adoption support. We believe that, so our tagline is every child, every family, every step of the way. And we have adoption competent, adoption specific therapists to help families, whether it's, talking about adoption specific issues, or maybe your child is having behavioral challenges that might be rooted in identity and, self-esteem. We're there for that. We also have a post-op search and reunion social worker who, for families that maybe don't have that open relationship with the birth family, but they want to make that connection, say 21 years later, we have search services to help them make that connection and unite after 21 years. So yeah, we've got all of that at our agency. So I'm placement services. I'm all of the stuff that happens for the actual placement. And then I've got my clinical services, my director of clinical services, who handles all the counseling and support groups and family finding and all of that.
And let's dig into something else. So it's going to sound like Pam and I sit on the phone every day. We really don't. But when we have our conversation,
I'd love to.
No, Shanitra. I'm sorry. I'm gonna call you because you know what? I gotta ask you about some things. So
I'm busy.
But there was what you say, Shanitra?
I said I'm busy. You have time to talk to Pam. I'm busy. I'm going to talk to Pam because she's talking to you and me, but you're not talking to me. I'm talking to Kenya. I'm done. I don't have time.
Look, she got the money. I'm here to talk.
Well, right. And I'm trying to have a conversation too. Still, I feel like I need
to. For you, David. The door is closed.
This is horrible. So, in one of the other conversations that another person and I had, when we're dealing with this whole ethical piece, there are so many misconceptions and we're just going to call a thing, so many untruths that go into this. And I'm very conscious about how I approach it, because what we have to understand is that adoption, while it is beautiful, while it has been amazing for me, there's still a trauma, not to my child as an adoptee, and clearly to that birth parent and anybody else who has been closely associated with this process. And so with that, there are some things out there that deal with, and this is why this ethical conversation was so necessary, deal with the vetting, and that there are agencies that are not properly vetting their prospective parents. Pam, can you speak to that a little bit? Can you tell us a little bit about what that looks like?
What reputable vetting looks like, or
So really the vetting that, and I'm using the word vetting, but really we're talking about the home study process, which
Yeah.
is that process that really does vet the prospective
Yeah.
parent.
Yeah. So there's two layers to that. I mean, every state has its set of regulations that governs the home study process, that lists out the number of visits and the kind of information that is gathered, like background checks and financial information and medical information. So every state, again, every state has its own regulatory outline as to what should happen. But then there's the other layer that we believe at my agency is important, is like the education of adoption. And not only did you check the boxes, right, but do you also really understand what it means to be an adoptive parent? Do you understand the gravity of emotions that are in the world of adoption for all members of the constellation? um, Meaning, we do trainings for our families on birth parent grief and infant grief and adoptive parent grief, right? Because there's that sense of, that this may not meet the expectation that I had of adoption. So we have families check all the boxes, but we also go through a process of conversation, of education, of to train them about the world of adoption and what does it mean to be an adoptive family. What if it's an interracial adoption? Do you have the skills as a parent to parent a child who's not the same race as you? And not only did you just say, yeah, I checked the boxes there too, but do you really understand what it means to raise a child who is of a different race than you and who may be of a minority race, right? Because your perspective might be as a white person and your child is a minority. And do you thoroughly understand what that means to raise a child who's a different race than you? So that's sort of the vetting that my agency really believes in. And I think a lot of times it's another one of those things like, why do we have to go through this process? And what's this all about? And my thought is, we're placing another person's child in your home. And we want to ensure that not only are you checking the boxes, but that you really understand what you're getting into. And you really understand what this means for your child, for your child's birth parents, for you. Because it's not just about today at placement, it's about 10, 20 years from now as well.
Long term. Yeah. Because, and I'm glad you said that, because that is a thing, along with why did I have to pay so much? And I'm gonna say this now, I'm gonna make it sound a little bit tacky because I've heard this said too. So you didn't buy a baby. So we understand where what this funding is, because that has been something that is said. Well, are we buying? We're not. That's not even legal. So we're just gonna say that. And with that, when it goes into that whole thing, and I'll say this as an adoptive parent, there were times, especially when you're waiting, and and again, there are so many similarities with the adoptive parent and those who are, I might say this incorrectly, who are on the journey, who are trying to conceive, and they're struggling in this, and we're all sitting there. So the prospective adoptive parent who's waiting and the one who's trying to conceive, and we're all looking, thinking, why did it happen for them? Why is it not happening for me? And for the adoptive parent, prospective adoptive parent, we're sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, they've asked me all of these questions. And we look over here at this person who shouldn't even be raising an ant, much like a child, right? But it is, while it can be daunting, it can be exasperating. I would say my process wasn't. I'm not going to say this just because Pam was a part of that process. I mean, she made it very, very easy. I don't know, what other processes are, because I've only had one. But at the same time, one thing that I can say I appreciated about it was that in the end, I got to tell my life story. How many people get to tell their life story? Right? You've never even had the chance to think about these things. You've lived it, the good, the bad, and the in between. And even in that process, there's something that, say it is something that may not be so beautiful. And this is something else people need to know. You don't have to paint a picture. You don't have to paint a picture. Your reality is your reality. And those realities are then what can help you to become a better parent. They really can. Because if you've had this perfect life, I don't quite understand how you would then go about parenting, because life isn't always going to be easy, right? But I say all that to say that people do. They have that question about why I had to go through all this. Why did I have to tell all of my business? It can be a lot, but I say look at the beauty in it, because there is the time when you can look back and reflect on things that are pretty remarkable about your life and your experience. The churchy thing is there's a song I like, How I Got Over. So sometimes when there's been that other thing that hasn't been so good, you can look back through telling that story and say, oh my God, I got over, and look at where I am now. I just had to put that in because, again, there are these things that are out there, and I get it. When you're not a part of a process, you don't understand, and you kind of pick it apart maybe in the wrong ways, or maybe you've heard things that just are from one perspective, and sometimes if we get one-sided situation, it may not necessarily be completely and totally accurate. And I had a ramble moment, but again, this was something that was a pressing thing. And to that, I'm gonna jump over to you, Pam. Was there something else that based in that conversation that was had? Because I'm going to say this, Pam and I saw something. We saw a video that bothered us. And I didn't know she'd already seen it. I saw it and immediately sent it to her. And it dealt with and there was an adoptee having conversation. That's why I say there is trauma. There is trauma. And we never want to be insensitive to the trauma that can be. And I sent it to Pam because I was like, oh my God, as an adoptive parent, I didn't buy my baby. I'm not a trafficker, because these are things that are out there that those of us that are adoptive parents are traffickers. I mean, these are the things that they infuriate me, but I have to learn to not be, because again, there's somebody else whose experience is something a little different. But these are the things. Is there something else there, Pam, that you want to throw out there as something that people need to erase?
The only other thing I think in that video that there was that mention of just private adoption being negative, being bad, and that all private adoption is unlicensed and unregulated, and that's not true at all. Private adoption, because they were saying public adoption and private adoption, not considering that like inside private adoption, there's agencies, there's attorneys, there's a lot of regulation. So that was just one of the mistruths that we were talking about, that I really felt was important to clarify that. Private adoption is pretty regulated.
And with that, to tag on to that too, with public, and I'm not trying to tear this down, okay? So because we need people to adopt from the foster care system. That's a very clear thing. The system is overrun. But what I will say to that is, specifically for people in the LGBTQ community, you need to consider that there are 13 states that can discriminate based on sexual identity, orientation, and religion. So when we talk about the vetting process and we consider that there are places that can vet you out of it because of who you are, you need to consider that may not be the most ethical. Okay. That's that. Do we have anything? Kenya, are there any questions that you've seen come through the chat at all?
No questions, just lots of loving this, great conversation. People are, like we said in the beginning, listening, absorbing all of this, because I'm sitting back. I don't know if you see, I keep on sitting back because I'm just like taking all the information in, and sometimes I'm texting my sister on the side, be like, hey, guess what? Like as soon as y'all say something, like that's why I keep on looking down. I'm like sending messages along and like pulling things up. No, nothing bad. I think everyone's just absorbing all the information. It's a great conversation.
This is great. Do we have, as we are, I think we have I've about worn Pam and Shanitra out. Are there any things any kind of things you want to throw out there as kind of putting a neat little bow on what you've already shared with us?
I'll pop in. It has been an absolute pleasure to be a part of this esteemed panel today. I'm so happy to spread the word about Gift of Adoption Fund. We are here. I have money. Email me. Get on the web page www.giftofadoption.org. Singular, not plural. Just Google it, Gift of Adoption. You will find us.
Yeah.
Email me if you have questions. I'm happy to answer them. If you feel uncomfortable about applying because you may feel like maybe our family is not a fit for the program, call me, email me. I'm happy to discuss. I do that with a lot of families. There's so many preconceived notions about what we can expect to who would receive funding, how many families we help, or we don't help grandparents. So there's so many myths out there. And I says, people cannot speak on Gift of Adoption's behalf. Please call me. I run the grants program. It is my baby wholeheartedly. So if you're not sure, every adoptive family and grant applicant is a snowflake. Everybody's special. So call me. I'm happy to talk to you about your adoptive situation, where you are in the process, if it's a good time to apply or not. So I am happy to do that. If I had a sign, it would say, "We have money. We want to help. Please send in an application." And thank you. Takes a bow.
You're gonna get some other calls because you can't be yelling out, "We have money." You can't yell that out.
It's like everybody in reverse. We have the money. So I'm just saying, we're trying to help. We're trying to help.
Yeah.
But mainly, I was hoping to get across today by joining this panel is spreading the word. So if one person out there had no idea Gift of Adoption was here, now they do. So I did my job.
Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you again for having me.
Oh, no, thank you.
I do think also so many families say, "Oh, I would love to adopt, except I can't afford it." And I think it's really important for
right there. Where's she? Right there.
She has money.
She got money.
And so, Pam, what would you like to? Would you have money?
I just want to encourage. Yeah, well, I don't have any money. I don't have any money.
You don't have any money?
So.
Okay.
Hi, Crystal.
I just want to encourage families to do their research. As I mentioned earlier, like people tend to stick with like people.
Yeah.
Do your research and ask ask those people who they would refer. I think one of the things that about Journey to Josiah is that you are you're doing a lot of that research, and you're helping families learn how to research. Adoption is the Wild Wild West. So do your research, and you will find good entities. You will find good people. This has been a pleasure to be on here. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. This information has been amazing. And Pam, I may need you to, because I want this in terms of these bills too. So I may need you to, whenever you have a moment, we're not going to talk because we don't need Shanitra.
Here we go. Here we go.
So, but if you could,
I'm only talking with your Shanitra's on there.
That's
right. That's what we're going to do.
There you go.
I just want to email me. Oh my God.
I'm looking busy, David. I'm blocking you right now.
You know what?
I'm done with this panel.
I'm about to fall completely out of my chair. And so if you could just email me those bills. And then we want to make sure that the people have the bill. I need the bills too, so that when I'm telling my families what to do, I can talk while we know that they're not officially passed yet, that they're on the way. They're on the way. No, Shanitra, I'm gonna call you tomorrow. We need to talk.
I'm busy.
But yeah, if you could do that, that would be wonderful. Kenya, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. You're great. No. This has been a great conversation. Thank you all for this information. I didn't know, like, I've known the name of these organizations, but I didn't know all the great work that you all did. Because I've been on a lot of websites. Oh, so I definitely remember these names. So it was great to have an opportunity to sit and speak with you all. I would love to on the Center for Black Equities page, Capital Ballroom Council's page, share your information, share your websites, and your contact information, because I'm sure there's going to be someone that may not be watching the show tonight, but will watch the show in a week's time, or someone like me that's at 4 o'clock in the morning scrolling through YouTube, come across it, because that's what I can't sleep. I go right to YouTube. I would watch this and have questions. So I encourage folks to reach out to us, drop your question in. We'll get you the answer, and we'll create a resource for all this information. I did want to talk really quickly, not to plug anyone in particular, but recently I attended a meeting, a Gallup roundtable for the Kids Save Embrace project. Which really talked about the American views in U.S. foster care, which was quite interesting. And there's a lot of information that if you go to the website, kidsave.org, you can read the report and really see some people's impressions and thoughts about fostering, and get some clarity in some of the misconceptions, like we kind of did tonight. Talked about it. So that's something that I actually keep it right here, because I'm always thumbing through it. I'm going through it. But no, this was great. Thank you both for so much. Not only sharing the information, and doing the work, but also being great people and clearly enjoying to do the work as well. I want to thank you, because you can do the work, but if you don't enjoy doing the work, you can tell. You can definitely tell that both of you enjoy doing the work and enjoy creating these families.
Yeah.
I want to thank you all for that.
Aw.
Thank you.
Thank you both so very, very, very much. And to our guests, I hope that you all got something very, very meaningful, something very, very useful. The adoption journey is not as daunting as you may feel. I always say this all the time. It seems challenging, but it's not as daunting as you may feel. And there are people like myself that can help you along the way, no matter where you are in the United States. We do this together. I hold your hand. I help you walk through this process. There is nothing greater in this world, honestly, for me, because this is the process I know, than walking this process. It is beautiful. It's amazing. And then when you have great people, such as a Pam from Paths for Families and a Shanitra who's got money, honey, then you can do it. You can do it. So there's a lot out there. There's a lot of support, and you can do it. You can do it. Don't be afraid of the process.
Absolutely.
So thank you all again.
And have a great night.
You guys as well. Thanks again.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank
All right,
you.
good night.